Good afternoon and welcome to A House Divided, coming to you live from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago. If it's on our shelves, it's history. My name is Bjorn Skaptison and I am the host for today's event. And I am thrilled to see you here. I am Stacy Lynn. Stacy, are you ready for this party?
Yes, I'm ready. I've been ready all day.
Okay, great, great. Well, welcome to the show, Stacy. Folks at home, Dr. Stacy Lynn edited Abraham Lincoln's papers for 25 years. She is a Lincolnian. She is the author of four books, including Mary Lincoln, Southern Girl, Northern Woman. She is currently an associate editor of the Jane Addams papers, and she is the author of Loving Lincoln, a personal history of the women who shaped Lincoln's life and legacy. It comes to us from Southern Illinois University Press. The cost is $45. You can order it at the link in the comments. Congratulations, Stacy, on the publication of Loving Lincoln.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for joining us. Gosh, there's so much to talk about here. There's so much to talk about here, Stacey. I'm not even sure how we're going to get started. Maybe we'll wait for everybody to ask questions first off. But no, I do know where I want to start. Even before we start to talk about the book, tell me about this wonderful dust jacket. What sells a book, folks at home? Dust jackets sell books. Dust jackets and the book being about Abraham Lincoln are two things that sell books.
Yes. So this book it's a deeply personal book. And so when we were first talking about book design, we argued a lot at the press about the title of the book. We were set on Loving Lincoln. We knew that that was going to be the title, and we wanted to convey the personal nature of the book. And so that's where we come with the personal history of the women who shaped Lincoln's life and legacy. But there are personal pictures of me throughout the book, me just kind of being a Lincoln fan. And there's this wonderful book. It's actually a studio photograph that was taken of me wearing a replica of Abraham Lincoln's hat. And at the Papers of Abraham Lincoln, we did a lot of educational outreach. And we got a grant to have a hat made by this Canadian maker perfect replica of the Smithsonian Lincoln hat. And it fit my head perfectly. I don't know what that means exactly. It was always kind of funny. I would say, well, Lincoln's hat fits me. Of all the staff members, it fit my head the best. And so we were having some studio pictures made, and I put the hat on, and they took this picture of me in the Lincoln hat. And I knew I wanted this picture to be in the book. So yeah. And so that's the inspiration for the cover. So a designer that they hired said, let's do something with that photograph. And so my son-in-law took some more modern shots of me because I'm very young in that picture. And this cover came out of that kind of crazy fun photo from long ago. So
Yeah.
there we have it. I love the cover. When I got it, when I finally saw it, I cried. I was just it perfectly represents what this book is about.
All right. Well, then let's dive into that. Can you, can you, boy, can you briefly try to explain the book, an elevator pitch, at least knowing that
Yes.
we'll talk about more? Because this book
Yes.
seems to live comfortably in multiple genres. It is scholarly history of the women in Lincoln's life, but it's also memoir. It's got historiography in it. It's got some cultural history in
Yes.
it. So you're probably best positioned to tell us what this thing is.
Yeah. So I want to start by saying that when I pitched this book to SIU Press, um, it was going to be a scholarly kind of narrative biography of Lincoln, but highlighting the stories of all of women.
Hmm.
It was just necessary for me to tell these stories of women, and so I knew that it was going to be a kind of a collective biography of women, but also their biographies laser focused on Lincoln. So I got an advance contract to write this scholarly book, and then I started writing it. And what poured out of me, it just was kind of a natural, weird, wonderful thing that happens when a writer sits down to finally write. And all of this kind of personal stuff started pouring out of me. And when I got done writing the book, I realized that I was one of the women.
Hmm.
And so there's stories in the book about 90 different women across Lincoln's life and legacy, but I'm one of those women. And so I knew that I had written something that blurred the lines of biography and memoir and autobiography and personal history. And I loved it almost immediately. And my acquisitions editor, Sylvia Rodriguez, she loved it immediately too. It just felt like I had struck that perfect note without even really knowing that I
Hmm.
was doing it when I was writing. It was a magical kind of thing that happened in the writing process.
Well, Sylvia is one of the
So
greats. She really
she
is.
is. I
Uh,
know.
I don't. We could almost say that Sylvia is the great unknown person behind all of the great Lincoln books,
Right.
but I don't want her to be unknown. I talk,
I know,
and
me
every
either.
scholar I know that has encountered Sylvia says she's one of the great editors that's ever worked in the field of Lincoln.
I totally agree. She is the best, I think.
Hmm.
When many years ago, 15 years ago, maybe more, she told me, when you're ready to write your book about Lincoln, you call me first.
Okay.
And I really didn't know if I would write a book about Lincoln. After I lost my job at the Lincoln Papers, and was dealing with a lot of personal grief, and then the professional grief of losing kind of my life in Lincoln studies, I didn't know if I would be able to write that book. But the pandemic, a lot of us had time to sit around and think about our lives during the pandemic. And when I realized I was ready, I called Sylvia. And she has been a wonderful supporter of the book, and she's just been wonderful to work with. I cannot say
Hmm.
more about her. And it feels right in a lot of ways for me to be this book to be at SIU Press, because having just the books that it sits on the shelf with at SIU Press, it just feels good. It makes my heart full.
Yeah, yeah, and they are again they are a contributor to the field of Lincoln studies
Exactly.
in their way as a publisher. And we might get
Exactly.
into this later because I have all these other questions, but a lot of this book recognizes the wondrous and very varied ways that people are involved with Lincoln studies in very valuable ways.
Yeah.
Um, which brings us to, I want to share um, another slide here because I don't know how many Lincoln books open with this particular thing, but there's Jim Randall.
Yep.
Uh, and I don't know how many times authors have said, back in 1936, James Randall asked the question, has the Lincoln theme been exhausted? And so I thought what we could do today, at least briefly, I want to show you it. There it
I
is,
know.
everybody.
Oh, that's very cool. Oh, I love that.
Everybody
Yay.
talks about how James Randall in 1936 asked, "Has the Lincoln theme been exhausted?" And I sometimes we lose track of the fact that it's an actual thing.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
speech that he gave at the
yep.
American Historical Review Association, and it went into the review. And this is a reprint. This is what you might have taken home from that speech that day. Yeah, it was a speech, and so let's jump. But let's, for your purposes, let's jump
Mhm.
into what Randall said that day because one of the things he said is it's kind of ironic, but the way I read it is he seemed to be saying the Lincoln theme has not been exhausted because I haven't written my book yet.
Yep. That's how everybody answers the question, Randall's question, right?
Yeah,
It's kind of an inside joke in Lincoln studies, has the Lincoln.
right, right. But I'll tell you one thing that he does say that, in fact, let's pick up this question right now of the various ways that people encounter Lincoln and then contribute to the Lincoln Field by doing it. Because within the first paragraph, before he's done with the first paragraph, James Randall has made a valiant effort to insult absolutely everybody that has already been writing about Lincoln. He says the hand of the amateur has rested heavily upon Lincoln studies. Not only the amateur historian, but the collector, the manuscript dealer, me, the propagandist, the political enthusiast, the literary adventurer. He even takes a swipe at the Union League Club, trying to
Oh,
say
no,
all of these people shouldn't have been
no.
writing about Lincoln. It should just be me. So yeah, what's your response? What's your response to James Randall, and how does that come through in this book?
Yeah, I think where I think Jim Randall would say it was a terrible thing that that Lincoln kind of belonged to everybody, and
Mhm.
that historians needed to take control of the Lincoln story or whatever. And I see. Okay, well, let me just backtrack for a minute. So
Okay.
people would ask me all the time, what do you like about being a Lincoln historian? And I would say, well, part of it is that I love spending all day with Lincoln, and that's half of it. But the other half of it is being involved with and interacting with people in the world who consume Lincoln in all different kinds of ways, who have this, they feel connected to Lincoln. They love the history, but they also feel like his spirit, life force.
Mhm.
And I also think that every generation wants to get right with Lincoln in some ways, and we all have our own stories to tell. And Lincoln is always who we want to tell that story through. And so the Lincoln theme is never going to be exhausted because there's always going to be a new generation asking new questions of themselves and the past, and asking how they're situated. And Lincoln is such a universal figure for us, not only as an icon of American democracy and a great American political leader, but as a human being whom we are all inspired by and we see as aspirational in a lot of ways, and who we literally we love Lincoln. We really do love
Mhm.
Lincoln in a way, and I believe that's because Lincoln is us. And if you look across the generations, and I think I even say even every bloke wants to write his book about Lincoln, and I don't see that as a negative thing. I think that's a reflection of the significance of Lincoln in our American story. It's a reflection of our connection to Lincoln, no matter who we are and when we live. And so the Lincoln theme will never be exhausted, and I hope that it will never be exhausted.
Right, right. It won't be exhausted because we're not going to run out of people that want to
Exactly.
study Lincoln,
I
and they'll all
also
have
love
something to say.
Exactly. I also love too that his wife, Jim Randall's wife, also knew that the Lincoln theme was not exhausted.
Exactly, exactly. I want to talk about Ruth Randall in a little bit, but let's jump into the women that are in your book, because the book does look at Lincoln's relations with women, and then also these other things that make the book so fascinating. We've been talking about the other things up till this time, but let's look at at some of the primary pictures. Uh, the it looks at various women that Lincoln knew and how he interacted with them, including women he loved and women that he was friends with and women that were his clients, women that he encountered. Um, and so, did you find a common thread through all of the women on how Lincoln viewed women, on how he interacted with women, or how his interactions matured over time?
Right. Well, I will say that I think it is pretty clear that Abraham Lincoln was attracted to Kentucky women. So there was a sensibility about Kentucky women, educated Kentucky women. A lot of these women who emerge in the Lincoln story have Kentucky roots.
Mhm.
I'm not sure exactly if I know what that might mean, but I think it speaks to sensibility in a lot of ways, this upland Southern kind of person is driven to succeed, is educated, is has is even if they are women and who aren't don't have political power, he's drawn to women who have opinions about politics. He's drawn to women who are well read. And so I think Lincoln early on learns to appreciate a woman who will speak her mind, and who, I think one of the best stories I love about Lincoln is the story of Elizabeth Abel. I think his friendship with her in New Salem allowed him to explore his intellectual side at a fireside talking with women. That's as every bit as important to Lincoln's development and his kind of evolving personal and political ethos as it was hanging out at the tavern with men and wrestling with Jack Armstrong. I see those as equally important, but the story of the women tends to be less specific. And then I think, I am of the opinion that Lincoln married a woman. He married a strong-willed, well-educated, opinionated Kentucky woman. And that was okay with him, that he wanted to have conversations with women that were had a sophisticated level to them. And he didn't always agree with the women who he was arguing with. And there are examples of that in the White House. But he let women have their say, and he felt like women had a valid voice. And that comes through with every story that, you look at with Lincoln. Oh, here's another woman who Lincoln is listening to and hearing. And the big thing that I argue, one of the most important arguments I think I make in the book, is in the section on women and President Lincoln. Women during the Lincoln presidency had greater access to the president than any other president before. And part of that was because women were more politically involved. They were more engaged with their politics. So it's the agency of the women. Partly it's because of the war. The strenuous, and horrifying circumstances of the war made women more willing to press their wants and their worries at the president's door. So that is definitely a part of why there's more access. Women had more access to President Lincoln. But I also think that we have to give Lincoln some agency in that access as well. He didn't have to see all these women. He did not have to write all these thank you letters to women or entertain their thoughts. He did not have to see Jessie Fremont when she arrived at the White House dirty from traveling and demanding that he fixed what he had done to her husband. He didn't have to see her, but he did. And he did not grant her wishes on the merits of her case, but he let her have her case. And so I think that's really important when we study the Lincoln presidency, to remember that women are there, even though they're not the people he's dealing with in Congress. They're not commanding armies. They're not ultimately people who can return him to office in 1864, right? But he considers women, Lincoln considered women part of his constituency. Yeah. And I think that matters.
Yeah. And this would lead into, I do want to talk about the Mary and Abraham Lincoln's marriage coming up here in a little bit, because we could probably want to cover that more fulsomely. But I think we're leading right now into another type of relationship that you have expertise in, and that is the way he would interact with women who were clients of his. Yes. And so we'll choose Melissa Goings as just because it's a fun story, but it also shows that as an attorney, he treats clients as clients, and they have cases. Yes. And not everybody is going to, in those times, not everybody is going to treat a female client the same way.
No, you're absolutely right. And one of the big arguments that I've used, and a lot of my early studies of Lincoln, was the law practice. And I was very drawn early on to the cases involving women. So particularly you have like estate kind of settlement cases where women are fighting for their dower or that. So those are kind of the basic cases, or debt cases. But more interesting in terms of Lincoln are the slander cases and I think most importantly, the divorce practice. So
Hmm.
Abraham Lincoln handled about 150 divorce cases in a time when divorce cases in Illinois, they weren't uncommon, but they weren't typical. And he handled 40% of the divorce cases in his home county of Sangamon. And I can tell you there were many attorneys who did not handle divorce cases at all.
Hmm.
And so that speaks, on the one hand, to Lincoln's belief that women, because of their vulnerability before the law, deserved good representation. And so I think a lot of the stories in the law practice speak to kind of Lincoln as a person. The cases that he took for his New Salem women friends, for example, and would take pro bono or for the payment of a meal. It was important to him that women have representation before the law at a time when a lot of male attorneys weren't terribly concerned with women's legal status. I will give a shout out to William Herndon, who was Lincoln's third law partner, who was also equally interested in women's vulnerability before the law too.
Hmm.
And partly he learned that from Lincoln, but partly it was kind of his own sensibility too. So the divorce practice is, it's easy for the divorce practice to be illustrative of that because we know that Lincoln handled so many divorce cases for the time period.
Right, but you tackle the Melissa Goings case, and
Yes,
you really tell us more about Goings than other than previous authors have, and I want the folks at home to actually take note of this because Melissa Goings will exist in another kind of Lincoln biography as a funny story about Lincoln interacting with a woman client. And this
right,
book tells the story of Melissa Goings
exactly.
and her
Yeah,
interaction with her attorney. So help
exactly.
and some folks that are listening now won't know the Melissa Goings story. So please just give us a short
Okay,
version.
so right, so the kind of short version is that Melissa Goings was an elderly woman, although elderly by the standards of the 1850s, who she had a troubled relationship. It's pretty clear from the evidence that I found that she was probably an abused wife. She and her elderly husband, who he was older than her by a bit, but they were arguing about the opening of a window in their house, and he threatened to strangle her. And she resisted him coming at her, picked up a piece of kitchen firewood, and smacked him upside his head. He suffered an injury that did not kill him immediately, but ultimately resulted in a brain injury that he died a few days later. So Melissa Goings was indicted for murder. There was really she killed him. There was no doubt. There was an effort for it to be a manslaughter charge instead of a murder charge, and it was very clear from a lot of the evidence that was entered in the case, there wasn't a lot of will to prosecute this woman who had obviously been an abused woman. She'd raised her family and been a good member of the community. And so Lincoln becomes her attorney. And one of the things I'll say too, these trials that seem so dramatic and huge in today and are drawn out over TV over weeks and weeks at a time, a murder trial might only take a day or maybe 2 days. And so her case came up and there was some motions in the courtroom, and Lincoln asked for some sort of a break. We don't know why. The break was not entered into the court record like it should have been. She is taken from the courtroom by Lincoln, maybe the bailiff, maybe even the prosecuting attorney. And the bailiff comes back to retrieve her a little while later. It's possible she needed to collect herself, or I don't know. And the bailiff comes back to collect Melissa, and she's gone. And he says, "Where is your client?" And Lincoln says, "I don't know where my client is." And the bailiff says, "Where is she?" "Well, she said she was thirsty, and I told her there was some really good water in Tennessee." So it's a funny story about Lincoln maybe helping a woman abscond from the law, and we can dismiss it as that, and people can say, well, maybe it didn't happen. It's just a funny story. But there are two later pieces of evidence. One, that Lincoln tells this story again, but he tells it as if it's another attorney. And Hay writes it down in his diary. And it's also, the story is entered into the court record of the case, which is very unusual. And it turns out Melissa Goings did not go to Tennessee. I could never find her in Tennessee, but she ended up in Iowa, and she lived with her one of her sons in Iowa. One of her daughters joined her in Iowa. And during the Civil War, when Lincoln is telling this story to Hay, telling it about another attorney, Melissa Goings is living her life in California with her son. She dies, I think, in 1867. So the story in Lincoln biography is just, oh yeah, this funny story. Lincoln, ha ha ha, helped his client escape justice, but nobody really believes it. But I suspect that the story may actually have some truth to it. And what really matters in the story is this woman who was living in this violent relationship, who defended herself to a violent husband, and then had to suffer this court trial. And so the story is really about Melissa Goings, right? But when we tell the story with Melissa Goings in mind, it just sounds different in the Lincoln narrative, right? It sounds, it's not just a story in Lincoln's story, it's a real story. And that's what history is. History is a collection of overlapping stories. Our story is never our own. It's always shared and evolving. And so it's important to me in these stories to tell these little mini biographies of the women, so that we know them first, and then we can see them on equal footing with Lincoln.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very well stated, because it reminds us that the purpose of studying Lincoln, well, if we make the purpose of studying Lincoln looking at Lincoln, then all of the other people are bit players in this movie of Lincoln we make in our heads, when in fact they were people that lived their entire lives, and they were the most important people to them, whether it's
Exactly.
Melissa Goings
Exactly.
or her late husband.
Yes. And I admit it is hard with an historical figure like Lincoln to see them as human first, right? Because we start with great and we study them because they're great, and then we go backwards and try to figure out what made them great. And in that sort of, blinders on focus, we miss a lot of the stories on the periphery that are informing their lives as their lives are evolving. And so
Yeah.
I admit it's hard to do with figures like Lincoln. It's
Yeah.
easier to do with lesser known characters. We can start with human and then see how their lives unfold.
Right.
So Alexa off. Sorry about that. I have an automated NPR comes on. Sorry about that.
Well, now we know what Alexa thinks. Well, let us, boy, we are blowing through our time here, Stacy. And for those of you that are watching at home, if you have questions, please put them in the comments. I'm going to jump in and ask a few of them in a few minutes here. But let us start with the most important relationship Abraham Lincoln had with a woman, and that is Mary Lincoln.
Yes.
That is his wife and his partner, and and shall we say the target of many many adversarial historical inquiries from historians going back to Billy Herndon.
Oh, yes.
Oh yes, oh yes. Well, hey, you said one good thing about Billy Herndon already. So if he,
Yes.
yeah,
I like Billy Herndon. I have a great deal of empathy and sympathy for William Herndon. So,
right. But
because Lincoln did.
Mary Lincoln is Lincoln's wife, uh, and what we see here, and what we see in other good biographies of Mary Lincoln, she is Lincoln's wife, and she is Lincoln's partner, and she
Yes.
is Lincoln's equal in political conversation.
I think
And
so. Yes.
yeah. And so tell us about, well, tell us a little bit about Mary, but I think something that your book gets really strongly, because you do write a lot about Mary, is their relationship.
Mhm. Yes. So there are 30 essays in this book, and Mary Lincoln gets a whole section. So the third section of the book is all Mary Lincoln. There's five essays kind of taking her at different angles. And then she gets the first essay in the legacy section in her efforts to have Lincoln's memorial at Oak Ridge Cemetery. So Mary Lincoln is the most important woman in Abraham Lincoln's life. And whether you love her or hate her, there is no way that you can deny that she is the most important woman in his life. And so it does nobody any good to start with Mary Lincoln by hating Mary Lincoln. And she's not a perfect person, and neither is her husband. And both the Lincolns, I think, struggled a little bit with their emotional well-being in different ways. And they had a companionate marriage that was based on Mary Lincoln having a great deal of autonomy within their household. And they established this immediately in their marriage. Lincoln was traveling the circuit, and Mary was left at home with babies and a house and the whole life to run on her own. And Lincoln was not only content to let Mary do all that and have her own little kingdom, but Mary Lincoln liked it that way too. And it was a marriage it was a companionate marriage. They shared a love of literature. I think a lot of their passion for each other came through their passion for partisan politics. They were indulgent parents together. Mary Lincoln wanted Lincoln more than anybody in the whole world. Mary Lincoln wanted her husband to be successful. And if we look at her as a two-dimensional villain, there's really no point in studying, I don't think, Abraham Lincoln at all, let alone Mary Lincoln. So a couple of things I always want people to know about Mary Lincoln is, one is that she was very well educated for the time period, which was attractive to Lincoln. It also made her curious. She was very curious about the world and open to all kinds of ideas. It's the reason why she liked French fashion and went to spiritualists. And later in her widowhood, when doctors couldn't help her with her physical ailments, she went to health spas that were unusual and people called eccentric, but she had an open mind about the world and a curiosity. And so I also want people to see Mary Lincoln as a survivor. I mean, this is a woman who buried 3 children, was sitting next to her husband when he was violently murdered. And then she had to endure the harsh treatment of the press against her and fight for a pension. And her survival as a precarious, being a widow in America in the 1800s was a precarious circumstance. And so I see her as an educated woman who knew her own mind, who was a survivor. And that's, I think, who Lincoln saw in her as well. So they had a robust and challenging marriage, like all marriage is challenging, but they were well suited, I think, to each other in a lot of ways.
Right. And I think one thing that I'm reading in Loving Lincoln is that we need to see the Lincolns as a relationship.
Yes.
And if we're going to understand Abraham Lincoln,
Yeah,
we need to see the
absolutely.
Lincolns as a relationship and not Mary Lincoln is like this and Abraham Lincoln is like that.
Exactly. And, I'll tell you, I'll give a shout out to Ruth Painter Randall, because I think her biography of the biography of the Lincoln marriage is what has most inspired me in my understanding of Mary Lincoln. Because Ruth Randall made the argument in that book, this partnership cannot be separated out.
Let's
Exactly.
go ahead and, since we're on it,
Right. Yeah.
love that dust jacket, huh?
I didn't make this up,
Yeah.
Ruth Randall wrote this book in the 1950s.
Yeah.
It's just that I don't know, Lincoln biographers had just not willing. They just don't want to, first of all, they don't want to take the time.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to be distracted by Mary Lincoln. And they also don't want to read her letters. If anybody reads Mary Lincoln's letters, there's no way you can not have a different opinion of her.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't want to take the time. and this is a problem not only in Lincoln historiography, but it's a problem in the biographies of a lot of great men, that women are not even in the pages.
Hmm.
One of the things when I was trying to prove in my research of the Lincoln presidency and women's access, I wanted to try to prove that with kind of some hard evidence. And I went to my local college library and I pulled out all like 2 or 3 modern biographies of the 15 presidents before Lincoln
Okay.
to see if how women access their presidencies. And women, the word women is not even a category as a word in the indices of these biographies. So it's not just a problem in Lincoln biography. It's a problem in all biographies of, great men, that women kind of just fall away. And it's lazy, I think, and partly, and it's unfortunate because I think we lose half of the story when we
Hmm.
don't talk about wives and sisters and mothers and daughters and the women who enrich every person's life.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not just a problem in Lincoln
Yeah,
historiography.
it's right. But then and to add to that, they're not in the couple is not two individual people. They are a relationship, and
Exactly.
therefore both of them are that relationship, not one or the
Yes.
other. And I
Yes,
think
and
Loving Lincoln in the Mary Lincoln chapters shows us that.
yeah, it seems pretty clear to me that pillow talk in the Lincoln bedroom was politics.
Yeah.
And Mary, like I love the McClellan story. The whole story of McClellan and is Lincoln going to fire him? Is he not?
Mhm.
Mary Lincoln is on that story the whole time, and you can see her weighing in, and I know they're talking about it, and so that's integrated. And a lot of the people who had Lincoln's ear, like Charles Sumner, for example,
Mhm.
it's because Mary, led them to Lincoln's ear. So there is that symbiosis of the two of them engaged in politics and dividing some of the sphere of the domestic, but as equal partners in so many ways
Yeah.
that to separate them out is to miss half the story in either one of their lives.
Right. I want to move I want to move on from the women in Lincoln's life to the women who helped create his legacy, which is an important part of your subtitle.
Yes.
And indeed, before I do that, I want to send a shout out to one of the a great Lincoln historian and historian of medicine who has reviewed your book and is a friend of this shop, Dr. Glenna Schroeder Lean, and among other things, in a wonderful review, Dr. Schroeder Lean states Stacy Lynn's study of Lincoln's many other relationships with women is uncommon and worth reading. Her decision to include herself as one of those women is courageous, and so a shout out to Glenna Schroeder Lean, she wrote a wonderful piece for the Concise Lincoln Library on Lincoln and
Yes.
medicine.
Lincoln and Medicine. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
great.
And
She
I
was on
had,
our show.
yes.
She was on this show
Yes. Yeah.
um, to talk about it. But no, what I want to introduce here is you do talk about Vinnie Ream, and I
Mm-hmm.
think we're just going to leave Vinnie for you. You buy the book and you read about
Yeah, yeah,
Vinnie
because
Ream
that's
and her
kind of
sculpture.
kind of a known story too.
Because I have another artist who isn't in the book,
Hmm.
but is one of my favorites because she's involved with something I have, and that is Sarah Fisher Ames.
Oh yes,
And
yes,
Sarah
yes.
Fisher Ames wanted to sculpt President Lincoln, and she had an appointment for a sitting in November of 1863. And then it
63.
turned out that he could not sit for her because he had to go to Gettysburg and make some sort of speech. And and so they brought in Alexander Gardner to make photos for Sarah Fisher Ames,
Mhm.
and
He has
he made this photo. And this is photo Ostendorf 77, we call it, after the Lloyd Ostendorf catalog of Lincoln
right.
photographs. It's the only photograph you're going to find of Lincoln where he's looking dead into the camera. It is one of the only photographs where he is not posing for the camera. And the story behind that is he's not intending to take a picture for the camera or for the public.
Right.
Alexander
Right.
Gardner is taking a picture for Sarah Fisher Ames so
Mhm.
that she can make her
Yes.
sculpture of Lincoln. She did. It currently sits outside Senator Dick Durbin's office.
Dick Durbin's office.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And in some time ago, probably around the turn of the century, we had the glass plate original
Oh, oh, very cool.
from
Oh, I love
Gardner,
it.
and we made from the
Yes.
glass this Lincoln from life.
Love
And so
it.
it's a wonderful thing. You can buy it and all that. You can buy it from us, but after you buy Stacy's book. But But it is, I can tell you, as a dealer in Lincolniana, I can tell you without question, it is everybody's favorite photo of Lincoln.
Yeah,
There's
it
not another
is.
photo where he's posed that people like as much as the one where he's just looking in the camera.
Yes. No, I love that photo too. And look at Lincoln helping out yet another woman. So, yeah, that photo is great. I'm personally, my favorite photo is the early photo of Lincoln, the one that is in the end papers of my book, of Lincoln right before he goes to Congress. I think,
Mhm.
I kind of, when I dream about Lincoln, it's a beardless Lincoln. So, but yes,
It's there. We can
yeah,
show it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, there's so many stories of women that aren't in loving Lincoln, right? I mean, you couldn't write about all. There's so many women that I wanted to write about, but you just have to draw the line. As it is, there's like 90 women in this book, so
Right. And the book has a very helpful appendix where you have all of the women
yeah, yeah,
that are there, and so you can go learn about each of them on their own in a little sort of uh,
yeah.
encyclopedia. Um,
Yeah,
of
that appendix was a very last minute thing that occurred to me as I was doing some final revisions, and I didn't think the press would go for it. I'm like,
Mhm.
really? But they loved it, and it is a great way to see all the women in one place.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna one of the women I want to touch on briefly is a woman, and like I said, we're talking about legacy here. So let's get into some of the historiography, some of the people who've written about Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have gotten a bigger book, but this is a book that is the most wonderful to look at because of the dust jacket,
Yeah, yeah, yes,
and that is
yes,
Ida Tarbell's A Reporter for
yes.
Lincoln. Now,
Yep.
in the first decade of the 20th century, Ida Tarbell was a force.
Oh my
Ida
goodness.
Tarbell was the expert on Lincoln.
Oh yes. She.
And you can't help but think when Jim Randall got so grouchy that people other than him were writing about Lincoln, he had to have been thinking about this woman who sold millions of books
I
about
know.
Abraham Lincoln. What
Exactly.
Give us something short on Ida Tarbell and how she influenced the memory of Lincoln, the legacy of Lincoln.
Yeah, well, I love this Tarbell story a lot because when I was a young scholar starting to read all the Lincoln stuff and get up to speed on Lincoln books, I read Tarbell early and I loved it. It remains one of my favorite biographies. But Tarbell is really the first kind of scholarly biographer because
Mhm.
before the biographers had been people who knew Lincoln, right?
Yeah.
And so when Tarbell is charged by McClure's magazine to write this serial history of Lincoln, she goes to see one of Lincoln's secretaries to see what he might have that he didn't use in Nicolay and Hayes' big biography of Lincoln and the collected papers of Lincoln. And he kind of snubbed her. And what people learned right away about Ida Tarbell is, disappointment like that only made her more determined.
Yeah.
So she went to Kentucky. She started reading newspapers. She went and talked to people in Indiana and Kentucky and Illinois. She started just talking to people about Lincoln and uncovering new documents. And she wrote this serialized history of Lincoln's life as a life unfolding. So she starts with this frontier kid who's raised up by frontier pioneers and gave dignity to his childhood. And exposed the beauty and the bucolic of his life. And she wrote this really beautiful from boyhood to president story that cast Lincoln as this human man who lived this human life and became this great leader. And it was a stunning revelation to people who read it. And it was enormously popular. And even the early academic biographers like Benjamin Thomas and Roy Basler loved her early work on Lincoln. So to me, I think I used the line in the book, but she will always, for me, be the last Lincoln man standing.
That's a good quote. I like that. But this does bring us to another woman who had a really interesting um, journey to become a Lincoln Scholar, and she plays an important part in your book, and that is Ruth Painter Randall. And
Yes.
here we see a picture of Ruth on the dust jacket of her book, I, Ruth, Autobiography of a Marriage. And here we have Ruth is the wife of Jim
Jim
Randall,
Randall.
who told
Yep.
us that the Lincoln theme would not be exhausted until he wrote his book. And then it certainly wasn't exhausted until Ruth Randall wrote her book and her many books on Lincoln,
Yes. Yes.
including, as you pointed out before, Mary Lincoln, Biography of a Marriage, a very
Correct.
important one.
Correct.
And so, and I think we have lost touch with Ruth Randall in the
We
21st
have.
century.
We have.
And I
Yeah,
think we need to meet her again. As you've already
I
said,
agree.
Biography of a Marriage is one of the best. It still holds up as one of the best Mary Lincoln biographies.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
I think it is the best, actually.
Okay.
The quick, I hope I can tell this quickly, but the story I love about Ruth is that Ruth was an educated woman. She had a master's degree in English. And so after she was married to Jim Randall, she really was an editorial assistant for him. And she did a lot of research for him. So she was very much engaged in his writing of history. Not to mention the fact feeding his graduate students at the University of Illinois, my alma mater, which all this comes back to me, and I get to share the alma mater with these people. So,
Yeah.
um, but Ruth, Jim Randall was writing a book or a biography of Salmon Chase for the National Biography, and it was going to be the quintessential biography. It ultimately had 24 pages, and Chase was married 3 times, had 6 daughters, and Jim tells Ruth Randall, "Oh, can you dispense with all these women?" And so Ruth actually writes the paragraph on the women in this Chase biography, 24 pages long, really kind of boring, except for Ruth's big meaty chapter about or paragraph about the real life of Salmon Chase.
Hmm.
And so by doing that work, doing this research, writing that little section of the biography, doing a lot, pushing Jim to even talk about Mary Lincoln in his multi-volume biography, she knew she had to tell Mary Lincoln's story too. And she knew that the Lincoln theme wasn't exhausted because Mary Lincoln was absent from it. And so that's when she wrote this really phenomenal biography of the Lincoln marriage, which sees them as, like we said before, as companions and not separate from each other. And also, too, she went on to write some biographies of other women in great men's lives, making an exclamation point on my point that women in these lives of great men matter.
Hmm.
And I do believe, I think Jean Baker's biography of Mary Lincoln has eclipsed Ruth because Ruth, there's no gendered analysis is missing. The context of women's studies is missing. But I might argue a little bit backward in that the feminist version kind of tries to separate Mary out a little too much. And I really strongly believe that we know Lincoln better and we know Mary Lincoln better if we study them as a couple who were married to each other and partners in politics and life for 23 years.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And it certainly would have
Yes, let's
been
bring
it certainly
Ruth
would have
back.
been the way that Mary thought of their life.
Right,
Hmm.
right, exactly. Yeah,
Um,
Mary. Yeah, Mary. But yeah, I deliberately chose to do Tarbell and Painter Randall because I do believe their work is still relevant and should be still relevant today.
right. Hey, we have a couple of questions, and I
Okay,
want to
good.
get into questions and shout outs from the people that are
Excellent.
watching. And I'm also going to look here, and we're about only have about 8 minutes left of our scheduled time,
I know it always
Stacy. But
goes
if you
so
have a little
fast.
extra time, we might go a little bit long.
Fine, I'm at your disposal.
Okay,
This is
okay.
so much fun for me. So yes,
I know this is a really fun conversation too.
I can
So we
talk
have a
about
number of
Lincoln
shout
forever.
outs. Jerry Rell is watching from Sydney, Australia.
Oh
Rita
yay!
Schaefer is in Madison, Georgia. Dave Bradley is in the UK. So
Oh,
this
I love
time
it.
we have actually
We're international.
we are not only are we international, we're not international because we have like one Canadian. We're international because we actually are embracing the globe with Australians and UK people, and they all
I love
say
it.
hello. And we're also hearing from the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast and forum. They're saying, "Hey, gang, hope you're staying cool." Jerry Rell says he also adds a comment. Your thesis and arguments are timeless and have been desperately needed for decades. Their relationship is best described as Lincoln being first among equals. That's what Jerry has to say
I love
about that.
that. Oh yes, very
Yeah.
good.
And then Bob Showers has a question about the title of the book. And Bob, Stacy talked about that in the first couple of minutes of the discussion. So I'm going to refer you back to the first couple of minutes. But she does talk about the title and the reasoning behind it. And then Civil War Breakfast Club podcast and
Oh,
forum. And I know you know them, and I know
oh
it's
yeah, oh
Darren.
yeah,
It's Darren who's asking this time.
oh yeah. I know, Darren.
Okay, and wants to know, can you talk about Lincoln's relationship with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and his Emancipation Proclamation's effect on women's rights in the 19th century? Or is that going to be another book?
Yeah, I think we, I honestly don't have much to say about that today. I First of all, let me say that one of the things when I was first studying the Lincolns, one of the things that sort of aggravated me is that Mary Lincoln wasn't a feminist. um, she was a privileged woman who her father validated her voice and Lincoln validated her viewpoint, but she didn't see herself as extra from Lincoln. She saw her success as confined to the Lincoln marriage, and she wasn't a feminist. And so I was annoyed by that in my early years when I was studying with a feminist scholar. I thought, why isn't Mary paying attention to the Seneca Falls Convention? Why isn't Mary
Mhm.
more interested in the women's rights argument? And she just wasn't. And as by extension, I think Lincoln really wasn't involved much with it either. But yeah, I do wish somebody would maybe write about Elizabeth Cady Stanton in that Civil War era
Mhm.
and Lincoln. I just don't have the knowledge to speak on it, I'm
Yeah.
afraid.
Yeah. Now, there's one other thing. I want to bring up relationships again because you write about these in the later part of the book. We've established that the relationship between Abraham and Mary Lincoln is crucial to understanding them. You don't understand them, you don't understand him if you don't. But also, you write about establishing relationships in the Lincoln community with people that you meet that have the same kind of fascination. And
Yes.
one of the people that you name check, and I want to give a shout out to our mutual friend Mary Fincher,
Yes, Mary.
who
Mary's
is
one of
part
my
of
favorites.
the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast, and a wonderful, energetic scholar, a
Oh,
very energetic scholar
no, I know,
that
right?
just grabs the topic like a terrier and shakes it around until
Yep.
she understands it. And you write about getting together with other Lincoln loonies,
Yes,
as
yes.
you call
Lincoln
them,
Loonies. Yep.
in sort of a community. And so
Yes.
you've written a book, and books are great ways to learn. I sell them. You should buy them. But you also point out, or at least comment for me, what is the role of our interpersonal communities in us learning about Lincoln and advancing Lincoln scholarship? It does
Yeah,
involve
exactly.
advancing Lincoln scholarship, the way we get together and form community. And
Yeah.
you talk about and you talk about Mary and the way she's approached her scholarship in your book.
Exactly. Because, well, a couple of reasons why I think this is important, and I think it's not only important in Lincoln studies. I think it's also important in a broader discussion about history. I'm very troubled by the lack of historical knowledge in this country, and I'm very troubled by the lack of political knowledge and civics understanding in our country, even of our politicians. And I think that's lacking partly because we don't have community about history. When you look at Lincoln, the I think I see the community of Lincoln as having a way of having power to connect people in a human way and in a deeply more personal way to the past, because we are all living this human history together. And the community of Lincoln scholarship allows us to approach Lincoln from 100 different ways, right? Like this meeting that I write about in my book, where a bunch of us Lincoln Loonies got together in Springfield one summer day. There were history teachers there, and podcasters, and bloggers, and a Mary Lincoln presenter, and a Lincoln curator. James Cornelius was there.
Mhm.
Um, and a woman, a librarian, Catherine Harris, who
Mhm.
presents Harriet Tubman. And so that community of people can talk about Lincoln in all different kinds of ways and make Lincoln accessible and make history accessible to people. I'm a historian, and I live in the ivory tower, and I edit Lincoln documents. Most of the time I have limited interaction with the public, but Mary's out there, engaging with the public. History teachers are interacting with students every day, inspiring them to love history. My friend Catherine Harris is going out there and showing people Harriet Tubman and making them connect with her in a personal, organic kind of a way. And I think historians of Lincoln can learn from that community, as historians about any figure can learn from those communities. And I'll tell you, I loved being a Lincoln scholar for the scholarship of it, but I really loved that Lincoln community.
Mhm.
And I can tell you too, this book that I wrote would not have been possible without that Lincoln community, because that was half of my love of Lincoln, was
Mhm.
this kind of nebulous, more engaging, joyful community of Lincoln Loonies. Sorry.
Right. Right. You saw them. Also, I'm a fan for Lincoln Loonies of the Lincoln Forum, in which has
Exactly.
a
Think of all
symposium in
these.
Gettysburg every year.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
it's
Look at all
always
these Lincoln groups gathering.
right. And it's always sold out. And there's always like 300 Lincoln Loonies, or Steven Spielberg called us Lincoln obsessives when he came to talk about it. I prefer Lincoln Looney.
I like it. Yeah, I like it better. That's what I've been calling us for 30 years. So
Yeah.
I'm going to stick with it.
But so much of what I've learned in anything that gives me, if I can claim any expertise, any authority in the field. I've never written a book, and I've never taught taught a class. Comes from getting together with people such as Lincoln Forum, spending 3 days. And the scholars that come to Lincoln Forum are all the kind of scholars. I'll say all the kind of scholars. Maybe we'll find some exceptions, but the kind of scholars that would want to come out
Yeah, for the
and be
most
a
part,
part of a Lincoln
yes,
Looney,
exactly.
including the academic scholars. I'll say like
Right.
John White, that would
Yes. Oh, yeah.
love to
Oh,
get
yeah.
out
Oh,
and
yeah.
be
Absolutely. John is a Lincoln Looney.
Yeah,
for sure.
He's not only a scholar, he is a Lincoln Looney. That's going to have to be
Well, I
a
like
new
him.
criteria that we have to.
Exactly.
You might get a PhD and you might
Exactly.
write a
Mhm.
book, but if you're going to be a Lincoln Looney, you're going to need to
Yeah, that's a whole other
go to
thing.
things like Lincoln Forum or yeah.
And this too, Bjorn, this is why the Lincoln theme again will never be exhausted, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, exactly. Because in spite of James Randall's best attempts, the Lincoln Loonies are always going to drive the car
oh
by
yes.
buying
And
books,
I want
by
them
writing their
driving the
books.
car.
Huh?
I kind of want them driving the car.
Yeah,
So
I kind of want them to drive the car. Yeah, yeah. I imagine Jim Randall in the back seat trying to hold on while people steer his topic back and forth.
I love that.
Oh gosh, let me check and see if anybody else has given us any more questions or comments. We don't have any more questions or comments from the folks right now, and so I'm going to take one more look at my list of.
Okay.
Oh no,
Oh, great.
there's a real topic I want to talk about
Oh,
here. So we're gonna get at least 5 more minutes out of this.
okay. Yeah, cool.
I
I
know
don't have any more.
you have um, a wonderful one of the essays is about your encounter with Sally Field, which actor is going to play the best Lincoln, the best Mary, and I want you to tell me about that in a second. But again, somebody that's not in your book that I love is I think Ruth Gordon might have been the best Mary for all of the reasons that people hate Ruth Gordon's um, portrayal
Oh,
of Mary Lincoln and Abe Lincoln in Illinois.
I'm gonna
She's
write it
too
down because
aggressive. She's
I haven't watched that movie for years.
oh
So
well,
I'm
first
gonna
of all,
make
Ruth
a
Gordon
note
is
of that.
wonderful, but also,
That's the
she
young. Is that the
plays.
young? Is that the
Oh yeah,
young?
she's young. Yeah, young Mary and in Illinois, and she plays the the way critics interpret the part is that she's too too aggressive and she's battering her husband or whatever. She's all of the bad things about Mary uh, and her psychology, um, and but also they're saying the critics will point out that Lincoln, she's pushing Lincoln to be a success. She's pushing Lincoln to be a candidate, and they make it seem like Mary's the power behind the throne. And take another look at Ruth Gordon's
Yeah,
portrayal because
I haven't.
maybe all of these negative reviews are right and they're just not negative. Maybe
Yeah,
she has
that's
it.
right. I just don't. It's been so many years since I've seen the movie. I can't even comment. But
Yeah.
you've given me some homework. So
Yeah, go take a look at Ruth Gordon
yeah,
again. But I would agree with you. Certainly in our generation, Sally Field is our Mary. So tell us about Sally.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's kind of a quirky, weird story, right?
Mhm.
And I wrote the essay, and I wasn't going to include it. But then after I read it, I'm like, no, it really kind of gets at this cultural quality of the Lincoln story, right?
Mhm.
So I lived in St. Louis for many years, and I was a huge, my favorite, I love left bank books.
Mhm.
And they had great lecture events with authors, and I always went and loved to go to their book
Mhm.
talks, and they
Shout
do
out
a
to independent booksellers.
Yep, exactly. And they do a great literary festival. And I saw that Sally Field was going to be a headliner at the Lit Fest. And I thought, well, I don't really read celebrity memoir, and I don't dislike Sally Field, but I really liked her portrayal of Mary Lincoln. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go. I bought a VIP ticket that I thought would get me into a reception where I could actually meet her. That's what the
Mhm.
plan was. And so I get to the event and they apologized. She had to fly early. And so we were only going to be able to ask questions. So they let us put questions on a card. And didn't know if I would be lucky enough for them to read my question from the stage. So I sat up up to the stage, and Sally Field talked about her book in pieces. And when they got to the Q&A, they asked my question third. And
Mhm.
after they asked a flying nun question and a Burt Reynolds question, and Sally Field just kind of, the question was read by the interviewer, and Sally Field just kind of lit up and she said, Oh my God, I'm so glad that you asked me that, because there's this book, and it's this big book, and it's got all of Mary Lincoln's letters in it. And I just read all those letters, and I couldn't believe how much that got me into her head. And I learned about her grief and her love and her that it was just so amazing. And I knew that after I read her letters that I would do a sympathetic portrayal of her,
Hmm.
that to portray her was not only important to portray her right, but also to get Lincoln right.
Hmm.
And she said this, and in such a beautiful way, that I said, where are the Lincoln biographers who like, why couldn't they have read the Lincoln letters, or why couldn't they have said what Sally Field said, was that to get Mary right was to also get Lincoln right.
Right.
And so it was just a wonderful kind of experience, and it kind of opened my mind to that experience. Kind of led me to this more personal book too, in a lot of ways, even though I didn't write I didn't conceive of the essay until later. But it made me realize that the story that I wanted to tell about Lincoln through these women and through my own feminine eyes
Hmm.
was valid, and that it was right, and that I would definitely do it at some day.
Right.
I felt validated and seen by Sally Field. And she was really adorable and wonderful, and I liked her. I really liked her. So
Yeah. That is wonderful. Now, Mary is currently on Broadway. Uh,
oh god, yes. I
do you even want me to ask about Oh Mary?
kind of.
High
I don't
camp,
mind. Yeah,
maybe
I
low
mean,
camp. I don't know.
you know what? I get that it's humor, and it's,
Hmm.
farce, and it's, theater or whatever. But my initial reaction to it was I chafed at it, because
Hmm.
okay, another man, banging on, just beating Mary upside her head, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not completely, I'm not completely joyless. So I do see the humor of it, and I've seen a couple of his interviews where the curls are bouncing,
Yeah.
and so I know he's not doing it to be disrespectful. But I chafed, because I'm like, oh gosh, another man,
Yeah. Yeah. Telling us
making
about Mary.
fun
Yeah.
or disparaging Mary Lincoln. But I think he does it with a great deal of joy. And
Hmm.
again, here's a bloke who maybe isn't, Jim Randall would say, what is this guy doing weighing in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But, he has a right too, because Lincoln is all of us. He
Yeah.
belongs to all of us.
Now, Lincoln is going to hit the stage again, though. We talked about this before.
Yes. Yes.
Lincoln and the Bardo is being developed into an opera, and
Yes. Yeah.
so what do you know so far about that? I know you're going to have a chance to go to
Yeah.
Chautauqua.
Yeah, I am going. I'm the third week of. If you're familiar with the Chautauqua Institution, which
Hmm.
is a place in New York that for 10 weeks people gather to learn and to experience music and art and read books in common, and it's been kind of a magical place for artists and authors. And I have the great fortune of going with a group of people from President Lincoln's Cottage. They're workshopping Lincoln in the Bardo opera at Chautauqua, and we're going to provide historical talks about the Lincoln family and grief.
Hmm.
And so we're kind of it's called a master series class. And so I'm going to do a lecture about the Lincoln family and grief. And there's going to be a couple of, Callie Hawkins, who is the director of Lincoln's Cottage, is going to talk about the grief exhibit at the cottage.
Hmm.
And so it's a way to just inform the opera and grief. And again, I will say, George Saunders is an author. He's not a
Hmm.
historian. And when he wrote Lincoln in the Bardo, he got at Lincoln's grief in a way that historians can't do.
Yeah.
And there's great heart in that, and value in that as well. And so I think when the book came out, I think for the most part, Lincoln people loved it,
Hmm.
because sometimes art can do what historians can't do.
Right.
And I think it all kind of went to our hearts. And so again, here's George Saunders playing a role in the legacy of Lincoln, and he's not a historian either. So
Yeah. Yeah.
again, the Lincoln theme is not exhausted.
No, it's not. It is not exhausted. Hey, I think
I'm
since
not.
we
I will. I have to
go
admit,
ahead.
I'm not a huge opera fan.
Yeah.
So, but I'm open and I'm excited because I loved Lincoln in the Bardo. I've read it 3 times. So,
Right. Right. Well, I bet it's going to be wonderful.
oh, I know. I
Um,
know. I'm gonna cry probably.
yeah. 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 Um, I would probably cry even if it were bad, but I just love the story so much.
I know. I know. I'm gonna cry. There's no.
Uh-huh.
There's no.
And so I can't wait to hear more about that. And someday I'll get a chance to actually see that.
Yeah.
Once again, thank you, Stacy. You have brought
Thank you.
you have landed the conversation by bringing us back to the Lincoln theme is not
Yeah.
exhausted, and
Never.
there's plenty of room for new voices and new great books.
Yes.
And one of the great books that's one of the best books that come out in a long time, one of the most
Thank you.
imaginative books to come out in a long time, and books with a lot in it, Stacy, that they even have to buy the book and read it to get some of the things that
Yes.
Stacy shares in the book that we didn't discuss today in the conversation. That's what you need the book, and those things in the book are really going to make you understand that Stacy Lynn has brought a new voice and a new book to Lincoln Studies. And so thank you for that. Thank you for that, Stacy. And I want all of you to go to the link in the comments and order the book. You're going to get a first edition, whatever that is. And you're going to get it with a signed Abraham Lincoln Bookshop book plate in August. So once again, Stacy Lynn, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
It's been a wonderful conversation. And I'm going to thank everybody who has been watching us today. I can't shout out to all of you and still end this thing before bedtime. So I will just say thank you very much. I'm Bjorn Skaptason. Stacy Lynn is our author. This has been A House Divided, coming to you from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago. Bye.